In these times of uncertainty, it's all the more important that we keep collaborating, informing, and inspiring each other, so that we can be smarter and better tomorrow. Welcome to the Pakhuis de Zwijger livecast.
Welcome, good evening. At Tech for Society here, I'm Puk van Dijk. I'm your moderator this evening. I want to welcome you at this series of, in total, 3. This is the second episode of the livecast around digital ledger design and blockchain technologies. And in the first episode, which was last week, we talked about the uses of disorder in the blockchain city. We explored everything around the human in the machine. And with our guests, we explored the possibilities of human messiness in optimizing blockchain governance systems. The second episode today is called Values in the Blockchain City. And we asked the question if blockchain systems can be designed to support alternative economies and solidarity. The series is organized by the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences lectorates, Play and Civic Media and Institute of Network Cultures, and het Nieuwe Instituut, together with Pakhuis de Zwijger. At home, you are probably watching this program maybe via the livecast of the website of Pakhuis de Zwijger. And you can also actually participate in the program today. If you go to the website and click on the page of this program, there's a yellow Zoom button. If you go there, then you can join the conversation by asking your question via the Q&A option through Zoom. I will look at your questions now and then and try to integrate them in the program. There's a lot to talk about. I am not alone here this evening, thankfully. I am joined by Inte Gloerig, who is sitting next to me. She is the project lead and researcher at the Institute of Network Cultures for the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences and also one of the organizers of this program. Today you are my intellectual sidekick. I guess that's how I would like to call you. You're here for, of course, support, but also for critical questions when needed. So welcome, Inte. And first and foremost, I wanted to ask you if you can give us a bit of an introduction into the Rights of the Blockchain City series that we organize here.
Yeah, so in the past years, we've seen a kind of hype around blockchain development that goes from kind of super commercial applications, but also more and more governmental, but also bottom-up blockchain initiatives. And what we're trying to do with this series is kind of walk through different layers of questions that you can ask about these kind of blockchain systems. So first, we started, as you said, with this kind of like, where is the human? Where is the kind of in these algorithmic systems? How do humans still have a voice? And this one today, we talk about. If we design for different kind of societies, if we use this technology as a way to change the world we live in, what kind of values could it support, and how, and what kind of limits should we also be aware of? And then next week we really kind of go to the meat of it. How does it work when people actually apply it?
Yeah. Great. After tonight, after we've spoken to our other guests, what do you expect and hope to learn from our speakers?
Yeah, I hope to really kind of crystallize where are the opportunities and where are the moments when we need to take a moment and take a breath and kind of evaluate, is blockchain the right technology? Or in this case, yes, or in that case, no. Those kind of things are difficult to think about before you actually make a system. But I think the speakers today will kind of be able to shine some light on, some practical experiences that they've had or they've seen where things went well or things didn't go so well.
So also learn from their learnings along the way.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll dive right into it. Can you introduce our first speaker?
So that's Alex Pazaritis, who so today is about values, and he's kind of he treats values as a commons. He has a kind of meta layer, I would say, and also he can say something about how can we treat values and different kinds of values in these blockchain systems and in technological systems. How can we facilitate different kinds of values, and particularly an example for planetary survival, which sounds amazing. So I'm really curious what he has to say about that.
Great. Alex, welcome. I'm just going to do a bit of a formal introduction as well. You hold a Master in Technology Governance, and you are a Junior Research Fellow and PhD candidate at the Tallinn University of Technology. You're also a co-writer of a book called P2P Accounting for, as Inte said, Planetary Survival. Welcome. I'm super happy that you're here. Let's see if we can open with a kind of a general question. Since you're working on alternative narratives, basically around value and the economy coming from community-based forms of production, can you tell us a bit about this work?
Hello, everyone, and I should say to begin with, a real pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Yes, my work has been focusing on value over the last few years, and it was quite a facet to that direction. Blockchain technology was actually one of the first, so to say, starting points where it became apparent that we need to begin theorizing again around value, because what we have today doesn't really make sense. So, I, for a long time, was considered to be part of this, a strange cult of alchemists, broadly known as economists. And I was trying to understand how any of these analytical tools that the discipline provided could explain the multiple issues that we face today in society. And so I discovered that for a long period of time, theory of value and value in general was not a part of discussion in economics, the political economy, and social sciences broadly. So it was kind of a point of revelation when by trying to understand value in blockchain and the distributed ledger technology and in the technological sphere in general, I had to go back to the roots of humanity and went back to anthropology, and I found a really interesting definition of value from the late David Graeber. He, in his book in 2001, An Anthropological Theory of Value, he described value as a mechanism through which actions acquire meaning within a broader social whole. And that was a really interesting point of view to understand value even in today's system. So if we imagine today's market society, which is or market economy, an economy based on the assumptions that make markets work, this is what provides the social whole in which we understand value. So the actions acquire meaning by being products of the market, by being exchanged in the markets. So in our attempt to understand how value is working in, so to say, community-based production or alternative forms of production, Stako will have more to say about that later on, we have to observe the tensions that are created on how these forms of organization need to operate in today's social whole, to put it broadly. And so in our work, we examine commons-based organization, that is, the organization of work around shared capacities, where people, communities of people coalesce around shared resources and also build consensus on the norms and the rules that they contribute to and also benefit from these shared resources, to put broadly. So in commons-based communities, there are elements of value that derive from this form of organization, but what is basically commoning, the quality of benefiting from and contributing to a shared resource. But what is we can also observe is that commoning is not only present in commons-based organization. You can find these forms of sharing happening in actually every organization. So what we want to observe is what makes this work and what makes these elements of value visible, so that the different forms of actions acquiring meaning in society are everywhere, from the relationship we have with our friends, from the type of contribution to a society that a mother makes by raising children and so on. But the institutional framework that we have is just on making all of these contributions visible. So this is where we come to, with our work on value, try to make to observe which elements in commons-based organization make these elements of value more visible over others.
Yeah, and can you maybe dig a little bit deeper into, this analysis of value itself as a commons? How does this look like, and maybe can you give us a bit more of a concrete example?
That would be nice. So in exploring elements of value in commons-based organization, it is easy to also imagine that the value creation is itself part of the commoning. It is part of this of the shared norms and the consensus that is built around the communities on what is meaningful, what is nice to have. So value as a commons is more of this emerging or normative concept. So not something that we can see and observe and we can touch, but something that it would be nice to have or use as a guiding line towards a situation that we would like to go. And why we would like to go there, it is, well, obviously because things are falling apart. We have a dying planet and a grim future before us, so we might be as well be looking for alternatives. And so, as I said before, because commoning as a practice is not only observed in commons-based organization, it is actually an element that human societies and human organizations have had since the dawn of history, and you can observe it in many forms. So value as a commons is a different guiding principle of a set of norms and institutions, both formal and informal, that exactly make these situations visible. To give an extreme example, so today, as I said, our market-based organization is what classifies elements of value over others. This is how we measure the value of things. So in how much goods and services are exchanged in the market, but also people, in how much the labor of people is being exchanged into the market. So if we take this assumption, you can take LeBron James, for instance, or any other NBA superstar, that they're worth several million times more than a nurse in a hospital. But today we have the COVID situation, and obviously NBA has been suspended. But and if nurses don't do their job, then LeBron James or any other NBA superstar cannot continue making millions. So the question is, when did we decide as societies that, kicking balls hard enough to get into the goalpost or whatever else we might be doing, talented individuals that did actually work very well, very much to get to that position. But when did we decide as society that this form of action is more meaningful than saving people in hospitals or eradicating, global poverty? If you take a couple of these sports superstars, and calculator. So, and the question, the thing is that we were never actually being asked. So we don't have agency in deciding what is more meaningful in a given context over the others. So
and I think we haven't been asked. So therefore we don't maybe we don't even have an idea, right?
Well, yes, and we take a lot of things as a given. So this is why I like Graeber's definition of putting this in a social whole, because and this is why I gave the example from the NBA or sports league, because pop culture, the stories that we tell to ourselves tell more about who we think we are and how we understand the world is functioning. So if the rules of the game are as such, we cannot even imagine something different.
Right.
So this is where value as a commons comes as an alternative proposition. So what if we think value in a different way? And what if, to put it in a more practical way, not decide how much LeBron James or hospital nurses are going to make, but how about a small local cooperative that decides how to redistribute surplus profit from a circle of production.
And so what I'm very curious about is we're talking about a blockchain city, so a world that is, steered by. You also mentioned before one of the values we have is a sustainable world to live in, and this is something we have to deal with, all of us. You wrote a book called Peer-to-Peer Accounting for Planetary Survival, which basically goes on that thread. Sounds kind of like an ambitious title, and I was wondering, what do you think?
It's a bit bold, yes.
Yes, it's a bit bold. So my last question is, what role do you think blockchain can actually play and fulfill in moving towards a more sustainable economy?
Well, I can speak in particular for my contribution to this co-authored publication, but from my perspective, to the extent that these value adjustments, this consensus that I described before on, collectively agreeing on what matters and what not, or how to classify different needs and such, to the extent that this is a technical matter, then blockchain and digital ledger technology there has a massive role to play, because it can allow a much more pluralistic version of reality than what we have today, which is basically double-entry bookkeeping. So this is how markets are regulated with this, 14th century type of technology that has evolved today, but basically the underlying logic is the same. So blockchains can take us a step further in including more elements and a much greater degree of diversity in what motivates people and what not. But I have to say again that this is to the extent that this is a technical matter. To the extent that this is a political matter, which is much larger as its percentage, this is where value as a commons and the rest comes in, that we need to build the concept, the stories, the alternative narrative before we're in position to crystallize this in the technical means that are going to create, the evidence upon which the decision-making and the consensus is going to be built.
Yeah. Inte, we have to wrap up our time with Alex, but we will come back with him later. Do you have something you have to, some pressing question for him now?
I have a question, but I can save it for later.
Okay, so Alex, we'll see you in a bit after, because we have a couple of more guests, but then Inte will have a question for you. Thank you so much for your contribution. Our next speaker is Stacco Troncoso. He is here on behalf of Disco Co-op. Let's see if he's there. Hello. Tell me, Stacco, what is a DISCO? In other words, Distributed Cooperative Organization. And also, going a little bit on the values we've been talking about, what values does it represent?
Well, not to start off with a negative, but I can tell you what a DISCO is not. It's not a DAO. And I'm not talking about Lao Tzu, but I'm talking about the decentralized autonomous organization, which those familiar with the blockchain space are basically an agglomeration of smart contracts configuring an organization. In our understanding, organizations are composed of humans, whether this be capitalist organizations or commons-based coalitions. And as Alex has alluded, I think that maybe we can agree at least if we study anthropologists like Graeber, that the commons is the de facto mode of social organization for humanity. So if organizations or groups of people working together have lost the commons, disco is actually one way to bring them back. So I always get beautifully stuck when I'm asked what is disco.
But actually, Stacco, I have a great solution for this. Something very visual, which I actually forgot because we were going to start with the video you sent us. So let's look at that, and then maybe after that you can reflect a little bit more on what does it represent. Let's take a look.
A distributed cooperative organization, or DISCO, is an organization that operates with a set of tools and principles to promote radical workplace democracy. They are based on a language of trust and cooperation, like dancing. DISCOs are designing community-based systems that improve how people work together to create and distribute value. They're alternative organizations where the commons principles meet feminist economics and where power becomes distributed. In the DISCO elements, you'll find the future of work, DISCO in a nutshell, 7 principles and 11 values, commons and peer governance, DISCO cat and DISCO tech, care before code, and building DISCO futures. To learn more, read the DISCO elements at elements.disco.coop.
There you go. Some visualization of what you were saying before. I'm not sure if you heard the story of Alex Pazaritis as well, but I was actually wondering if a disco is actually a kind of practical outcome of what he means with value as commons.
Yeah, Alex and I have worked a bunch together. We have similar influences and are very much on agreement on like processes of value. While agreeing with everything that Alex has said, I'm not so sure if value per se is a commons. To me, value is kind of a meta layer that can clarify, and Alex has spoken about visibility, that can clarify those more tacit aspects of commoning. And there are many definitions of commoning, and they are all true because they point to this fuzzy set of interactions between humans and nature, and between things created by humans. One way to describe them is as recurring solutions to common problems. And they often arise in the spaces in between the market and state. And as Alex has said, everything we value and all the processes we have are configured by the political economy that impinges towards us. So commoning nowadays cannot develop in absentia from the market and the state. What DISCO provides is a safe space for those who are either curious or identify with the commons, with cooperatives, with feminist economics, and with contributory accounting. Contributory accounting precedes the blockchain and was a solution proposed to the problem of free software. We have a lot of people contributing to free software, and Google decides to pay certain developers so we can make this great machine called Android, which, by the way, is the greatest surveillance mechanism ever designed by humankind, but it's based on free software. What it is not, like I said, is a decentralized autonomous organization, and we can talk more about that. It's a set of patterns. And again, read the stuff, because we're more interested in how you interpret it.
Yeah.
And a set of patterns of commoning is how do you make this relevant to your own lived experience and your own value.
So I read somewhere that you wrote, discos harness the utility of tech without being completely tech-centric. Why is that exactly? And also, how is that the case?
Well, with apologies to Donna Haraway, we are not cyborgs yet. So being tech-centric means defaulting to a technical snapshot of reality. And suddenly, as you say that, I'm reminded of, in the wake of the 2008 crisis, where Mario Monti, who's the new Italian president, basically finger-pointed goons, what were known as technocrats, to take over the presidencies of many nations, yeah? And that is being tech-centric, that is being technocratic. Tech-centric in the blockchain world, to me, means following white paper culture. For those not familiar, many blockchain projects are predicated on a white paper promising great decentralized outcomes. And while the promises may be nice, they are usually written by white males with a technological background that speak a very precise language that can only be understood usually by people with the same privileges, upbringing, education, etc. I think that rather than technocratic or auto-executed smart contracts to determine how our organizations run, I think that it's much more interested to have a community process and to let technology emerge from conversations and from needs. And over here, the notion of scale is critical. Some people in the blockchain world talk about this one world computer and synchronized machine. All the databases will be synchronized. And frankly, that to me sounds quite dystopian. The other hot potato in the blockchain world is trustlessness. We can do away with institutions because we can trust the algorithm to finesse our interactions so much that we don't have to worry about it. And we say, I mean, first of all, why blockchain? Why the blockchain city?
Right.
I can give reasons to that, for that, but I would like to hear other opinions. How about we develop trust? How can we develop trust in large projects? Well, there's concepts of subsidiarity and developing trust in small clusters which are federated. And again, how far do we, there's a word that is notoriously absent from the blockchain space called sufficiency. And in the context of the current ecological crisis, and I'm not going to talk about the dirty power that blockchain uses, but I could, of course. How about we have some sufficiency? How about we do more with less? How much do we want to tokenize on the blockchain? How much do we want to pixelate this value into fractions of zeros? How do you put love in the blockchain? So, like, you were talking about the messiness, and I'm sorry to have missed that, but the messy stuff is the interesting stuff. I'm making a caricature, but many in the blockchain world want to do away with this annoying messiness.
Yeah. Yeah. This instantly brings me to the next question, which is, I think, also a bit about what you mean with this messiness, because there's this algorithmic governance, and then there's this human messy governance, right? Or this kind of community involvement. And so, how is this balanced out in a disco? I mean, how do you keep the balance between this kind of rigid algorithm and the always kind of changing demand of the community itself?
I would say with legibility. Before you mentioned, humans can optimize blockchain governance. And I would say, how about blockchain or DLTs optimize the already existing success story of human governance that has let us achieve horrible things, but also like wonderful things. There are many ways to go about this, and Disco is one offer. And I think that Disco stands out because in a field that talks about decentralization, there is not enough talk of decentralizing power, hierarchy, the patriarchy, and colonialism. So all of those things, there are very old traditions that have already tackled these issues. So our offer to the blockchain world is learn from these traditions, and let's design our technology with legibility, meaning let's learn about governance as a community to know what we want, and then develop convivial tools to achieve, to optimize, to speed up the boring stuff so we can have more free time, or we can take better care of each other.
Right, right. I'm just looking at Inte before I go to my last question. Do you have a question?
Yeah, you just mentioned convivial tools, and this sounds really interesting to me. I would like to know much more. How does it work? Because what I really like about the project is that you guys have made so much text, and there's so much to read, and there's so much material, and it's beautiful. And also, as you said before, there's this the pink paper, as you guys are calling it. It kind of comes later, and it seems a bit always pushed forward. So how does this working with the community, being involved in technology, how does this function? I have a feeling that these convivial tools might be something that leads in that direction.
I mean, here we will default to Illich and his definition of convivial tools, which are basically tools by the community for the community. Normally, the tools that we use are imposed by other values or the prevailing political economy. I could geek out if you want, but I think that for me, the interest is more on the motives, on why we use certain tools. And I will misquote Andrew Lord saying, we can actually take down the master's house with the master's tools if we have a hacker mentality. And by hacking, to me, the definition of hacking is repurposing existing systems and or tools for things that they were not designed for. How do we articulate the convivial tools? I think that there's a place for blockchains when interactions do need that layer of trustlessness. But if you fit in a room, explain to me why you would want to put your interactions in a blockchain. I am much more excited by Web 3.0 technologies and IPFS, that and other things, which are more lightweight. But I'm even more excited about people sitting in a circle and having a conversation. There's this cooperative in Venezuela called Se Case Sola. They don't have bylaws. They talk all the time. They describe themselves as one long conversation. So when someone has to take an action, they know what to do. And there are hundreds of people in an assembly. So these things are not highlighted, but there are precedents for this. If people from Se Case Sola design tools, I will trust the governance that is reflected on those tools more than one person with kind of like Masonic architectural tendencies writing a white paper to ask for money through an ICO.
I have actually a question from one of our audience members, Stako. Her name is Connie, and she says, what about using the blockchain for real democracy, starting on the local level within communities beyond the partisan politics, going for the informed voice from the citizens, and after that, bottom up to the next regional, national levels and so on, by and for the citizens, as Stako himself said. What do you think about that?
Thank you, Connie. I think that's very exciting. And of course, the thing about like blockchain and representation is that blockchain could legally validate identity in fine-grained polls instead of voting every 4 years. But then let me give you two words, Trump and Brexit. If the population is so numb that they're making choices against their own class interest or even their own environmental interest, if we want to pixelate decision-making without an educational program on at least critical thinking, logical fallacies, the classics, which people are not dumb. People are treated as dumb and they're educated as dumb. So in this kind of federation, and there's certainly a lot to learn from anarchism in that way, I would start like have community meetings and then decide how you want to use blockchains. Do you want to use parallel shares? Do you always want to use blockchains? Do you only want to use blockchains once a month when you go to a provincial level? And I think that we have to be more nuanced rather than declaring like blockchain normativity, especially with the energy costs. And it's slow, the UX is crap. Everyone is waiting for sharding, parallel chains and side chains. But I'm sorry, I think Inter, you mentioned the word hype. Hype is what keeps Elon Musk's stock growing when like they're in negative numbers in their companies. So, maybe less hype and more face-to-face, let's talk. And the times are urgent. So.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Stako. We have more questions, but we'll save them for the end discussion. And we're going on with our next and final guest here. She is a researcher and activist and did a PhD on the values embedded in blockchain for the good projects. Her name is Silvio Semezine. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you for inviting.
Hi there. Thank you for being here. So, Sylvia, in your research, you look at blockchain for the good projects. What does this exactly mean, and what are you looking for in these projects?
Yeah. So, as you rightly said, I did a PhD research on blockchain imaginary. And in my research, I looked at blockchain application in the social sphere. So blockchain experts and enthusiasts in general, as well as institutions, explicitly argue that blockchain might exist beyond the commercial and financial purposes. So my first question was, is it possible to really separate cryptocurrencies from blockchain in the social sphere? Starting from there, I arrived to the idea of blockchain for good, especially looking at different European documents, also blockchain white papers, etc. And I tried to understand what developers and blockchain experts meant with that. So what they seem to mean is that there is a social dimension, like to the social dimension, which is related to a kind of ethical drive and positive collective impact of the application. So in this sense, blockchain would be used for social purposes such as environmental purposes, social aid, governmental activity, etc. And the key principle for the social good in blockchain are related to especially technological decentralization, autonomy, transparency, openness, data commons, as the speakers were arguing now, and renewed collaboration paradigms and alternative forms to generate and distribute value. So I got intrigued by this idea of using technology for good, especially because of the hype surrounding blockchain, which basically clashed with the current sociological perspective on the role of algorithms today and digital technologies in the societies. Thus, I asked myself whether we should adopt a more critical approach to the role of technology in doing good for the debate, and how. So I already say that my perspective on blockchain is quite critical, and I'm prepared to receiving questions about this. But basically, I started to investigate why some actors were considering blockchain as relevant in this sense. And I relied especially on data justice literature, cultural studies, and this allowed me to access blockchain visions of the world, analyzing them in terms of social justice.
Yeah.
I decided to look at different projects, different backgrounds of the project, and then delve deeper into this blockchain for good world.
Yeah, so we're very curious to hear a bit of an example of this kind of project, and also taking a step back, what kind of values and worldviews did you uncover in these blockchain for good projects? And please give us an example of one of these projects.
So it's also interesting to say that from the case studies that I analyzed, very few blockchain projects were actually active. More of them were more research projects, white papers, and probably the projects that were really built in blockchain was the eStonia project. So in that case, it was interesting to see how actually blockchain, then if you go to Estonia and talk to them, blockchain was actually used more for cybersecurity than for decentralization, for example, especially because it's attached to institutions. But it's also interesting to notice that blockchain has a number of different and also contraposing interpretation. And actually, to date, we lack a common definition of what a blockchain is and what can be used for. So in that sense, it was also difficult at the beginning to pick and collect, let's say, some case studies that were valid. This is also because blockchainers come from antagonist political environments, let's say. So this is, for example, the case of anarcho-communists. So, for example, I analyzed the case studies related to art and music, or anarcho-libertarians, which are another kind of a political take, let's say. In this sense, also in my work, I called blockchain a floating signifier, which means that blockchain can also acquire different meanings according to who frames it and who uses it. But there are also some common assumptions on blockchain that are shared inside the community that in my work I called the blockchain regimes of truth. And I borrowed this concept from Foucault. And it serves to point to the idea that there are some assumptions on the blockchain that are considered as true in the community. So in this sense, blockchain interpretation acquire a sort of performativity, capacity to construct shared narratives and social imaginaries on the potentiality of this technology. So first of all, for example, there is technological decentralization, which is believed to bring political and economic decentralization automatically. This is called the distribution myth in sociology. Secondly, there is social trust, which is understood in terms of automatization and competition, and this is called the trustless myth. And finally, there is also a change-making ethos among the community, which refers to the idea that the blockchainers, as I call them in my work, think that they can use blockchain to change the world. And going further in the analysis and answering the real question, I also try to understand what this meaning of doing good was according to blockchainers, because almost no literature on blockchain technology try to unpack this notion of good that underpins the implementation and understanding of blockchain in relation to social justice theory. And in my work, I argue that social good for blockchainers is very attained to the idea of equality conceived in terms of meritocracy. And also to the idea of creating value in terms of money for empowering people, and also providing mathematical accountability and efficiency to any social relation. So starting from the idea that every social relation can be metricized. And this is a very different approach compared to the traditional idea of social justice, which instead points to the idea of common good, comprising a broader understanding of solidarity in terms of recognition, representation, and distribution. So following this reasoning, the values that are then encoded in blockchain seem to repeat a sort of technocratic and rational approach to sociality, which leaves then room to neoliberal interpretation of technology that also subsume in the end the implementation of blockchain and make it a technological object which is strongly connected to finance in the end. So this is, yes.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that this is valid also for projects that come from more, let's say, the left, so communism that I analyzed, but also for other kind of political approach.
Yeah.
So it was the interesting part.
Yeah. And what kind of problems do these projects run into?
So basically, blockchainers' understanding of social relation overlooks social dynamics and cultural logics. It embeds a notion of the social based on metrics and competition and downplays the complexity of social organization and social change. There is still a dominant technocratic and rational approach to sociality, as I was saying, in the world of developers and tech entrepreneurs, as well as a genuine belief that in the power of technology as a means of individual empowerment. And in this sense, blockchain and blockchain imaginary becomes very attached to the so-called Californian ideology of the Silicon Valley. And therefore, it reinforces in the end neoliberal positions and views of the technology. Blockchain regimes of truth, as I was calling them, are therefore immersed in the discursive and material dispositives of power, of neoliberalism and technocracy, as they insist on seeing the power of the self and the power of technology as means of individual expression and social change. In this line, blockchain technology is believed to be inherently apt for the good because it has an open, transparent, and decentralized structure. Following this approach, social justice becomes increasingly understood as an economic practice, instead as an all-round concept based on solidarity and collectivity. Particularly, entrepreneurial individuals do not see economic enrichment and capital accumulation as radically opposed to doing social good and change the world. money instead become a way to change the things they do not like and reach also a personal fulfillment. So in the blockchain discourse, the role of collectivity is diminished in general. Social change is left in the hand of individuals that can play with technology and finance. And for this reason, blockchain development does not really seem to break up with the status quo. Contrarily, it seems to reinforce an hegemonic discourse of Silicon Valley technocrats. What I think is that if we accept too broad definitions of what doing good means, we might end up merging the idea of equality with meritocracy and only see economic growth as a means of democratization. Instead, we need to discuss social good in the digital society. We need to insist on the importance of social justice theory and look at technology in terms of recognition, redistribution, representation. So to end up, my opinion is that there is a need to sensitize developers and tech savvies on the importance of including social theory in the development of technology and creating interdisciplinary paths, as well as Stocco Troncoso was rightly saying, also creating more inclusion in the design, development, and the use of technology. Many social applications of the blockchain are born with the idea of disrupting the status quo in the digital sphere, but they fail to address social problems from a social perspective, and also often fails in a sort of capitalism realism, so accepting that the only way to change things is using the market with the rules of the market. Yeah. What, just to wrap up, what in my opinion seems at stake here in the blockchain world is like a urgent need to having more transparency, fairness, and accountability in the digital environment, and recognizing the power of digital platforms and their unethical use of user data. But this is more a political task rather than a purely technological one. So we cannot think in no way that there is a distributed technology, that a distributed technology will make up alone with the problems of power decentralization and social inequalities. So we need to abandon this technological determinism and develop a more humanized approach to technology, focusing more on common good and societal needs.
And the question still rests: why is it so difficult to break with these kind of these worldviews and accompanying values, right? I mean, so this is a question that I actually want to kind of use to flow into the group discussion and to bring the other speakers back as well. Thank you so much, Sylvia, for this. Also, looking at Inte, do you think that would be a good question to start the group conversation with? So why is it so difficult to break with the status quo? Let's start with Alex. Yeah, Alex.
Yes, that is a very critical question indeed. And as I briefly mentioned, one of the main reasons that I ended up focusing my thesis on theory of value and the concept of value by and large is exactly that you need to find something that is as pervasive and as hidden across the layers of the different assumptions we have about what it means to be a society in order to be able to start changing that. And I mentioned before that the social science discipline, but most importantly, economics, the sphere of human knowledge that is supposed to explain how our material conditions are affected and how our needs are covered, has not been discussing value for the last 50 or 60 years or something like that, which doesn't mean that value is not operating as a concept in the phenomena that create human life, but it is just assumed. It's done that we have been there, we have concluded to what value is. Basically, it's whatever the market say it is, and then we just go away with that. So I like the metaphor that we often use in STS that on digital technology in particular being something like MSG, the taste enhancer that the Asian food is usually is using, which is basically not something that has a taste of its own, but it's rather you get it to the food to make all and whatever already exists, more bold and more felt. So this is how digital technology works. It just enhances and throws to our face whatever assumptions we have about the human condition altogether. And this is no surprise, really, because digital technologies are being developed by humans. So they embody this messiness and the characteristics that we have, just clear the way the parts of this messiness that makes life worthwhile or something like that.
Yeah.
So, of course, I'm exaggerating, but this is more to make a point. Yeah. And Stack also mentioned that before. This is the idea that I like about the disco. And the reference to, dancing is not accidental. It's one of the people I have enjoyed looking at the different blockchain initiatives I have been looking myself was Arthur Brock from Holochain, who had that, I don't remember the quote exactly, but he mentioned at some point that it is easy to build, a consensus across computers of people, but can you make them sing in harmony or dance together? So those are the kinds of elements that cannot be encapsulated by metrics, however complicated and sophisticated they get. And this is where we should put our focus first, to identify those patterns that we would like to automate in the future, rather than starting the other way around.
Yeah. As also thinking about dance, it's really something we are deprived of this moment. I'm going to quickly make a side note, because we have one question that was still hanging in the chat from one of our viewers, also for Alex. So it's a bit of a side path, but going back to what you were talking before, Alex, the question is, did you have any experience with integrating the real true pricing within the commoning?
Oh, well, that kind of begs the question: what is considered to be the true pricing?
Yeah,
the
true pricing.
the one that it is in the market. So I can reflect back to Adam Smith's theory of value that kind of permeates our understanding of the neoliberal version of the economy today. That is, Adam Smith spoke about a natural price, which is, the price of goods that is the one that makes up the fair compensation for everyone, and is the one that is decided by supply and demand. So it is the one that nature decides. And a lot of the things that we see in the economics discipline that want to mimic hard sciences and physics today are working on the assumption that there's something natural operating out there, and we just need to discover it as explorers. But this deprives human societies of the means to change the rules and the institutions that human beings actually built to arrange the social life altogether. So, and this is where and I'm gonna shut up with that. And this is where the whole idea of value as a commons is aimed at, to exactly hand back power and agency of people to decide on the rules that they make up for the arrangement of their own material and physical life.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hopefully this also answers Connie's question. Going back to you, Inte, we're kind of going to the end of the program. Do you have a burning question for Stako or Sylvia?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen in all these contributions today is, I think that the importance of making values more tangible, more visible, talking about them, sharing them, representing them in systems. So Alex was talking about that in the beginning, but I also recognize it in Staco, where especially kind of making things recognizable in real life. I really liked in the video, like it's about dancing, it's about real life, it's about, you know, not some abstract system out there, but something, you know, that is what we all want to do right now. But then also in Sylvia's talk, this notion of these regimes of truth, and I was wondering if we could, if they could be broken by focusing on them and making them more visible. Kind of, so this idea of visible values, and I'm wondering how to kind of do this. How do we? When we talk with communities, it's very difficult to reach clarity on what are the values that we want to facilitate. So maybe if anyone has something to say to that.
Let's start with maybe Staco. I think you're on mute, Staco. Yeah, don't worry about it. It happens all the time.
That was a good thing, because I was saying, like, Spuo, I will quote myself and I will give the same answer, which is legibility. We need to understand value, and we need to understand new forms of value. Alex has alluded to Smith. From Smith, we have Ricardo, we have Marx, and we have the labor theory of value, which, you know, it's a good interpretation that value comes from human labor, but what about our relationship with the non-human world, with the environment? I'm passionate about, I think that Sylvia should make a dictionary, values a regiment of truth. And the same way, to tie it back to the blockchain, the same way that we have consensus mechanisms in the blockchain to agree that this transaction in this block with this hashtag is the real transaction, the monetary value that we use nowadays, or the stock value that is used for speculation, is another consensual mechanism that we consent to. Now, what we cannot do is go from, okay, this is we don't even have the gold standard anymore, okay? We're working with fiat currencies, but we agree that this is the value of the dollar. And we can print money, but we can print 3 trillion, you know, in the middle of COVID for like big businesses, etc. So how about other values? How about having a conversation on value? And, you know, how do we see it? How do we have this legibility? Disco is fun, but it's also very serious. And it's a welcoming honey trap for people to learn about the commons, to learn about feminist and ecological economics are totally absent in the blockchain space. So there are things to be learned over here. How do we communicate this thing that is so difficult? The Zapatistas have a philosophy of aprender escuchando, learning by listening. If you listen to people's needs, and if you design convivial tools to cater to their real life needs, we can get there. We cannot instantly get to this kind of like anarcho-communist future where from each according to their capacity to each according to their needs. We don't need tokens or anything. We need to clarify this. It's like if we're like addicts and we have to get off the substances, we need this step-by-step program for us to get there. Yeah. Another form of value and organization can help us. Maybe.
I'm also looking to Sylvia. Do you have anything to add up on Staco's contribution?
Well, I quite agree, actually. And moreover, I was thinking that also something that we might appreciate is that not, as I was saying before, not every social relation can be also transformed into value. So also understanding that often in the blockchain world, there is this imperative discourse on the idea that we can metricize social relation, which is also the basis then of metric power, which basically then sustains surveillance and algorithmic culture, etc. So I think we should probably might start to think that we need to educate people to technology, because at the moment technology is still strongly for experts of technology. Yeah. So we need to include more, as I was saying, interdisciplinary path, more theories, social theories, and try to create debates regarding the future of technology and how technology can actually be used for helping the people and the communities. I'm also trying to figure out where blockchain can work, at which level. Now I am in a research group which does this. So we are still trying to figure out how blockchain can be used to actually empower communities, not just individuals. But
I'm just going to break in, Sylvia, because we're kind of running out of time. But it's great to hear that we should also be focusing on education and making a more inclusive way of dealing with this technology. Inte, I'm looking at you because next week we're going to talk about urban commons in the blockchain city. What can we take away from this day that we're going to look on in the next session?
Yeah, I was thinking in the last minute, like, how can I wrap this up? Yeah. I think the takeaway is, don't move fast and break things, but talk with each other and think through consequences and work with communities, not just pushing technology.
In an inclusive way, yes. Definitely. Guest speakers, thank you so much for being here and for contributing. Also you, Inte, and everyone at home, of course, for watching. Next week, Urban Commons in the Blockchain City, real-world experiments using blockchain to support resource sharing in cities. Check out the website for more information, and thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful evening.